So I've been using the Lumix S1 for a couple of days now, and I think with a 6K open gate, amazing IBIS and build quality, that it might be the best value full-frame camera you can get in 2025. So for around a year now, I've been using the Lumix S5, which I think is an amazing camera. It's very easy to use. The file sizes are small, and with pretty much all Lumix cameras, the IBIS is pretty amazing. And I've been using it for all my YouTube videos, on personal projects, and even a feature film. And I've also been talking a lot about the camera on my YouTube channel. And there's been quite a few people that's asked me about the Lumix S1 and what I thought about the camera. And at the time, I hadn't tried the camera, but I was always curious about it, especially because it shoots in 6K and has open gate. So I was scrolling through the used market, and I found the Lumix S1 for around $1,100. And it had all the upgrades. It had Vlog, it had open gate, and it could shoot in 6K. So I thought it was quite a decent price, but I thought I'd just try my luck and send a bid of around $800, which they declined, but said they could sell it for $1,000, which again for this camera is a good price, but the camera is quite old, so I offered to buy it for $900, which they in the end accepted, which I'm quite happy about. I wasn't really sure if I was going to buy the camera or not. If they sold it for $1,100, I don't think I would have bought it. But as mentioned earlier, I've always been really curious about this camera, especially since I'm a big fan of the Lumix S5. And also it's a really good price, considering back in the day, it cost around $2,500. So I had this camera for a couple of days, and I must say that I'm really happy that I got this camera. First off, just holding it is significantly bigger than the Lumix S1. I think this is around 1 kilo, while the Lumix S5 is around 700 grams. And it feels very solid and sturdy. It feels very nice to hold and handle, and also really like the viewfinder on this camera. I do, however, think it's a little bit heavy. I think when putting on a PL mount and putting on the Blazer Remus 35mm, it becomes quite heavy to carry around and to shoot handheld with. But when you use a small lens like the TT Artisan 40mm, I think it's a perfect weight. Then it isn't too light, but the camera feels heavy enough where it feels very stable to use. One thing that I don't like about the body is the fact that the monitor doesn't flip out, so that you can see yourself when shooting videos like this. So I wish I could use this for talking heads for my own YouTube videos, but the fact that you can't flip the screen and face it towards you when you're filming yourself makes it quite hard to use when you're filming yourself. It does flip towards you, so if you're holding the camera far down, that's quite useful, but I do wish that the monitor could flip out like the Lumix S5. But the main thing I love about this camera is the image quality. So this camera shoots in 6K open gate. And when talking about the Lumix S5, I've been quite adamant that you don't really need open gate and you don't really need 6K, that 4K is enough. And I do still believe that, but I do have to be honest that I do really like the open gate and the 6K that comes out of this camera. When shooting with spherical lenses, like the TT Artisan 40mm, when I'm outside testing the camera, the main thing I like to shoot are people and faces. And I think the taller image that you're getting from the open gate makes it much more easier and pleasing to frame and shoot faces. I do think it helps in giving the image a more vintage look that I quite like. And also a great thing when you're shooting open gate and in 6K is that you can crop into 60:9, or you can crop into something like 4:3, or frame it for a vertical delivery. I think when shooting with something like the TT Artisan 40mm, the open gate really makes the lens shine, and I think it works perfectly to really put your subject in focus. Another great use of open gate is when you're shooting with anamorphic lenses. So pretty much my main lens is the Blazer Remus 35mm, which is a 1.5x anamorphic lens. I'm actually shooting on it right now. And the thing about the Blazer Remus 35mm compared to the other Remus lenses is that it is a S35 lens. So you're not meant to shoot full frame with it. However, when shooting open gate full frame with the Lumix S1 and shooting with the Blazer Remus 35mm, obviously you can't use the full frame because there's hard vignetting on the sides. However, there's no vignetting on top and bottom. So when you shoot open gate full frame on the Blazer Remus 35mm and you zoom into the image to get a 60:9 crop, you actually get to use the full height of the image while not getting any hard vignetting on the sides. And by doing this, you get a quite unique look. Obviously, since it isn't in CinemaScope, it looks a little less anamorphic. But since you're really pushing the lens, you get quite a lot of artifacts, and you get a very funky look. And one of the main reasons why I love shooting with the Lumix S1 and in open gate is to actually use the Blazer Remus 35mm this way. And when shooting this way, I'm actually shooting in T1.6. I'm shooting with a wide open aperture, which really helps amplify the more funky vintage look. And to me, it looks quite unique. And as mentioned earlier, I really like the 6K that you're getting from this camera. I'm not sure if this is right, but I do feel like the Lumix S1 compared to the Lumix S5 has even less of a processed look. I feel like the image I'm getting looks more organic, and I don't feel like there's a lot of post-processing baked into the image. I also really love the colors than I'm getting from the image. And obviously I haven't really done any scientific tests on dynamic range, for example. But from what I've experienced, I feel like the dynamic range holds up really well. The camera probably has a slow readout speed, but to me, there really isn't a problem. I don't really need a fast readout speed for what I'm doing. I think according to Cinedy, the readout speed is at around 20 milliseconds, probably even more than that when shooting in open gate. However, if that's a problem to you, there is a fix to this. If you're willing to shoot in APS-C mode and crop into the sensor and shoot in 4K 16:9 mode, you're able to half that number and get the readout speed down to 10 milliseconds, which is kind of insane for a camera at this price point. And these are similar numbers to the Lumix S5. And actually with the Lumix S5, I shot the whole feature film in APS-C mode, and I had no issues with the quality. And according to Cinedy, if you take the quality down to full HD, you get a readout speed of around 7 milliseconds. So if rolling shutter is a concern to you, and if readout speed is really important, then there are ways to fix this with the Lumix S1. So when talking about the Lumix S1 and its image quality, I have no complaints. I really find the open gate useful, and to me, the image has a very organic, pleasing look. Another great thing about the Lumix S1, and it's the main reason why I use Lumix cameras, is the IBIS. The in-body image stabilization that you get from this camera, and cameras like the Lumix S5, is just to me amazing. With the IBIS that you're getting from this camera, you don't have to rig the camera at all. Especially when shooting with spherical lenses, I've had pretty much no issues when it comes to IBIS artifacts. Obviously, when shooting handheld with IBIS, you get a little bit of that floaty look. But I do think with the Lumix S1 and the Lumix S5, it really isn't that noticeable. And I think you can get away with it on pretty much any project. Sometimes when I have 3-point contact, it sometimes even looks like the camera is on sticks. And the great thing about the IBIS is that it means that you don't have to rig out the camera to make it more heavy, to get a more stable image. You can just use the camera as is, which means you can save a lot of money because you don't need to spend money on extra gear to rig out the camera. The Lumix S1 doesn't only have normal IBIS, it also has anamorphic IBIS, which is very important to me, who really likes to shoot handheld with anamorphic lenses. And it's actually relatively unique to Lumix cameras. There are other cameras with IBIS where if you shoot anamorphic, the IBIS gets shut off. This is obviously not the case with the Lumix S1, and I actually think the anamorphic IBIS works surprisingly well. There are some times you get some wobbling, and you do have to accept that sometimes you do get some artifacts. But 95% of the time, it's completely usable. Speaking of anamorphic, you can actually de-squeeze the image on the internal monitor of the camera, which again saves you money and makes the camera easier to use, because if you're shooting anamorphic, you don't have to spend extra money on external monitor to de-squeeze the image. Cameras like the Sony FX3 also supports internal de-squeeze, but they only support 1.33x and 2x squeeze. But with Lumix S1, it supports pretty much all types of de-squeezes, like 1.8x and 1.5x. When it comes to autofocus, I have to be honest, I haven't tried it. Pretty much all the lenses I use are manual focus, but even with the TT Artisan 40mm, which does have autofocus, I still focus with it manually. And one of the reasons is because this is the way I've always done it, and it's my personal preference. I don't really like to rely on autofocus. And another reason is because with cameras like the Lumix S5 and the Lumix S1, is that they're quite notorious for having bad autofocus, especially for video. So if you need autofocus, this might not be the camera for you. However, I do think the fact that the camera has bad autofocus is to me a good thing. Due to the bad reputation that the Lumix S5 and Lumix S1 has, because of its poor autofocus, the value of these cameras has gone down significantly. So to me, as someone who doesn't use autofocus, this is actually a good thing. One thing I was curious about when buying this camera were the files and codecs. I've been shooting in OpenGate 6K 420 10-bit H.265. And one thing I was curious about was the 420. So with the Lumix S5, I've been shooting in 4K 422 10-bit. And I really like the colors that you get from the Lumix S5. It's very easy to color grade, and it's also very easy to edit. It's not too heavy on my computer, and also the file sizes are quite small. But I do think I like the colors that you get from the Lumix S1 even better. Even though it only shoots in 420, I think the 6K does a good job in compensating for the information that you get in the colors. And even though I'm exporting in 4K, I do think the 6K gives you a cleaner and more organic image. Also similar to Lumix S5, the file sizes are quite small. With the 4K with the Lumix S5, it shoots in 150 megabytes per second, while with the Lumix S1 with the 6K, you're shooting in 200 megabytes per second. So there isn't that much of a difference when it comes to file sizes, but the difference in resolution is quite big. So I do think those extra file sizes are worth it. I've even taken screenshots from test footage that I shot with the Lumix S1, and to me there's enough resolution that you can use the footage as stills. And obviously it shoots in H.265, which helps in keeping the file sizes small, while still holding on to a lot of information. And the great thing about this is that you get amazing image quality with very small file sizes. This means that you can save money on hard drives, because it takes quite a lot more time to actually fill up a hard drive with files that are H.265 compared to ProRes or RAW. So in that way, you can also save money. However, one bad thing about the H.265 is that it's quite heavy to edit and color grade. When editing and color grading the H.264 that comes from the Lumix S5 on my 2020 MacBook Pro, I had no issues. It ran extremely smoothly. But with the H.265 that comes from the Lumix S1, I'm having significantly more trouble. It stutters a lot more. The DaVinci Resolve is having a much more harder time to actually load in the image, which makes the workflow a little bit harder. However, you can mitigate this by turning the files into proxies and using the proxies instead. So this is not a huge deal, but it's something to be aware of. And to me, it's kind of worth it to keep the file sizes low while still getting a lot of resolution and information. And last thing I want to bring up, which I've been mentioning throughout this video, is the price. So you can easily get this camera for under $1,000. I even seen some places where you can get it for $800 or even $700, which to me is an insane price for what you're getting. You get amazing IBIS, you get OpenGate, you get 6K, and everything you need for Anamorphic support. It's also a relatively cheap camera to use. You don't have to rig it out. The only thing you really need is a battery, a lens, and an SD card, and you're pretty much ready to go. So if you buy a cheap lens, like the TT Artisan 40mm for example, which only costs around $168, and the fact that you can shoot with SD cards, which you can get for around $50, this means that you only have to spend around $1,000 to get a full usable camera package. And do honestly think that this is the best full-frame camera you can get for under $1,000. Just make sure that when you buy it used, that it has all the upgrades, like the Vlog and OpenGate upgrade. The battery life from the S1 is also pretty great. I was outside for over an hour shooting with the camera, and the battery life only went down 1 bar. But I only been using the camera for a couple of days, so I can't really talk too much about the battery life. So those were my first impressions of the Lumix S1. I think it's an amazing camera. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.